Welcome to Change Lab, where leaders talk openly about the realities of transformation, the trials, trade-offs, and transitions that separate intention from results. Today, I'm joined by Rob Alger, who is Senior Vice President of Health Plan IT Strategy at Kaiser Permanente, which is one of the largest healthcare systems in the country. Rob has been with Kaiser for nearly 2 decades and is responsible for shaping the technology strategy and investment portfolio that supports the organization's national health plan. He also chairs Kaiser's Health Plan AI Council, where leaders across the organization are working through some of the questions many companies are wrestling with right now, such as who governs AI, how do you balance speed with safety, and how do you build the infrastructure that allows AI to scale responsibly across a complex organization. So welcome, Rob. Really, really glad you're here.
Well, thank you, Sandra. Pleasure to be here today.
Well, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. We were able to talk before the webcast, and you shared some really interesting things with me, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with others as well. So let's start. Let's give folks a little bit of background. Kaiser Permanente is a very large organization, but it's not all over the country. So maybe you can give folks a little bit of background on Kaiser.
Sure, it'd be my pleasure. So, Kaiser Permanente, we're about a 75-year-old organization. We're an integrated delivery system. So, we have both hospitals, health plan, and then PMG, physician management partners. And we have an exclusive relationship between those entities. So, we provide care and coverage together. We operate in 10 states. We run about 40 hospitals in total. We're a little over 220,000 people as an organization, and we're servicing about 12.8 million members.
So just a
So
small
it's a
organization.
small organization. It has all the complexity of physician groups, hospitals, and health plans, and we just bring them all together. And it's an amazing organization that's really has a really strong opinion about the right way to deliver care. And we're not in the world of fee-for-service medicine. We're very much about how do you meet members where they need to be met and how do you deliver the care that they need.
Well, and way back when Henry Kaiser sort of created this system, which was truly innovative at the time, and now we are living in a world where there's a lot more innovation that the organization is undergoing and facing. Uh, I'd love to talk today about AI and your work leading the AI Council and some of the things that in an organization of Kaiser's size, some of the things that you're wrestling with and thinking about. And maybe we can start. I'm sure there are many, but let's start with, as I heard one person say, do you want to get a speeding ticket or a parking ticket? And this whole speed versus safety issue is, I think, one that every organization is wrestling with. Certainly, in a highly regulated industry where people's lives are truly on the line, it's an even bigger deal. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're managing this duality between speed and safety.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, I think. So let's just frame it a little bit. So when we talk about AI, we're really talking not just about large language models, we're talking about machine learning, we're talking about sort of a broad set of technologies there. So not just so it's not just Chat GPT. It's all sorts
Right.
of things that hang together. And we're also in a world of technology that I've never seen evolve at this rate. In fact, if you look back the last 6 months, the whole AI universe, because of agentic and agents, has completely changed. And some of the concerns, the speed, the issues have changed with it. And I can't point to another technical area that has moved at this rate. And it's also captured everyone's attention. So you look at the board level of a company and your board members are going, "Well, what are you doing with AI? Why aren't you going faster? How are we going to compete?
Mhm.
Are we going to be left behind? What are you doing?" And then you get down into the work and you go, "Oh my goodness, this is moving so quickly. How do I think about risk? How do I think about the right actions that we can take? How do we think about the bright blue lines that we like to set out when we think about technology to make sure we're doing the right things for the right people, and we're evolving at the rate of speed. So yeah, I'll tell you just, a fascinating aspect of this. I don't think there's a single day we don't receive one survey from somebody, whether it's a regulator, a customer group, a consulting group, asking us, "What are you doing with AI? What are you thinking about doing with AI? What might you do with AI? What should we be worried about that you might be thinking about with doing with AI?" So not only when you think about the normal elements of a technology risk around security and privacy and all of those things, there's now sort of a societal concept of risk. So,
Hmm.
what are the right things that people should be doing with AI technology? What do some people believe are the wrong things that you could be doing with AI technology? So, not only are you trying to calibrate to your own internal IT policies, you're also calibrating to an external audience. And at the same time, you're calibrating to the need to show progress in an amazing new world. So I don't, there is no magic here in terms of how do you think about bringing all of those forces together and coming up with the right answer. So I think we, like everyone else, are trying to fit the right style of governments, the right understanding about how one advances with the technology, and then make sure that we've articulated some principles that we're going to be able to use to make those judgments and help people broadly understand the judgments that need to be made. A principle for us is we do not make clinical decisions with AI.
Hmm.
We just don't. We don't do that. And right now, we don't do any AI that's outward facing that doesn't have a human in the loop. So there is nothing where it's purely an AI bot or generating an answer that's going to go out to a member. Now, we do take and use AIs to organize data much more efficiently and effectively. So when it comes time to make a decision, we've really accelerated and provided better information to feed that decision process. But that's quite different from making the decision and using
Right.
AI to do that. So those
So,
are
what
some of the things that are kind of bouncing around there.
Yeah, and I mean, I started with the word duality, and then you added in all of these pieces. It's more than two pieces. There's a lot to think about. I'd like to drill just for a second into into two things you said. One is that you don't make any clinical decisions. So what does that mean? That's a word that maybe. We could use a little more detail around clinical meaning. We don't make a prognosis with AI. We don't. What does that mean specifically?
Well, what it means is that we have professionals who are highly trained clinicians whose job it is to make clinical decisions. And a clinical decision could be, you know, whether we're going to move with a different procedure, what the actual diagnosis is, how we're going to code something, what the appropriate um, care pattern is going to be. Those are all clinical decisions. When you think about a health plan, one of the ones that's had a lot of publicity, of course, is someone asks to you to authorize a referral. Now, the
Mhm.
way you do that is you look at the corpus of clinical information you have, and then you apply it to a set of medical policy. And then you look at the medical policy and you say, does this meet the medical policy for the referral that you're asking for? But the point where you say yes or no is a clinical decision.
Okay.
Assembling the record, putting it in the right order, organizing the medical policy against it, those are the kinds of things that AI does very well.
Great.
Making a
So
final decision is not something that we would use AI for.
and so when you talk about a human in the loop, it's sort of it's sort of like that's when we get to a decision, that's where the humans become quite important.
A great example of human in the loop is in a contact center setting.
Okay.
We're doing some very advanced work with AI in the contact center world of using AI to try and help understand the intent of the call. And then how do you go out and get information that's going to be used to actually satisfy the question? So, but what we're doing there is we're taking a lot of, healthcare is full of arcane things like benefit codes and denial codes and claim codes. And so, the history has been you spend all your time teaching your contact center folks how to interpret this stuff. Where we're working is to get AI to go out and interpret and provide back English language kind of explanations based on
Nice.
the intent of the call. But it's not the AI talking to the member. It's our people talking to the member and using their knowledge, experience, and ability to shape that conversation. So that's a human in the loop.
Okay. So the member benefits because all of this messy work is sort of done behind the scenes and they still have the warmth of a human who is talking to them and translating it for them.
And not making errors that, sometimes can
Right.
creep in when you're using a large language model or other techniques. And also accuracy goes up because now we're properly interpreting things that are pretty arcane out there. When you start talking to someone about all the rules or about a Medicare dual or something, there's a lot out there, and it'd be very hard for it's very hard for an individual rep to know all this stuff, but we can use it to bring the right information forward, and then they can shape it into the conversation appropriately.
That's the dream, right? I mean, that's kind of what we'd all like to see, how we'd like to see everybody using it, is making the humans better. Uh,
That's really well said. We use, the industry vernacular and say, let everybody practice at the top of their license. You know,
hmm,
take the work that doesn't really require that and make it easier to access so that when you do make decisions, when you are using all of your knowledge, skills, and abilities, you're operating at the top of your license throughout the organization.
that's a great promise, and I think when and that is you talked earlier about articulating out, and of course you mentioned we have to articulate back to the board. We have sort of this public persona about
Yeah.
how we're managing AI, and then there's the communication to employees, I think I love you're operating at the top of your license that that says very clearly what the benefit is to them,
Mhm.
and it's what every employee wants to hear, I think. So that's great.
That's a great point. We want to know that we're contributing our most valuable self to the
Yes.
success of the organizations that we're part of.
Rob, let's take a step back because we jumped into kind of the sexy part, which is what AI can do in the workplace, and we'll get back to that. Uh, but you and I had a really interesting conversation where you talked with me about the what you called the AI orchestration layer.
Yep.
And I'd never heard that term. I don't know if it's a Rob Alger term
No, no.
or if it's out there.
Yep.
Uh, did you make that up or is it out there? Or are
I
other
did
people
not. I
talking
did
about it?
not make that up.
Okay.
I'll
Well, you were
whenever I make one up, I'll actually tell you so you don't
okay.
people go trying to Google
So
it and
we
they're like,
well, then I won't attribute it to you, but I'll attribute, my learning it to you. Can you talk about for other people who haven't heard about it, what this means, and specifically what it means to you as you look at this as an
sure,
issue?
sure. And we're not gonna go deep technically. So we're going to talk about this without getting into MCP servers and stuff like that. But an orchestration layer, an easy way to think about it is when you break a task down and then we're going to do elements of it, this layer is the thing that controls and fires off all of those elements and then brings them back together. So the term orchestration is a really good phrase to use in thinking about that. So think about the new world of agentics. So agent.
Uh-huh.
So someone poses a question or a problem, and now I'm going to break it down and let different agents deal with very specific elements of that. It's the orchestration layer that says, oh, here's what you're trying to do. I'm going to hand it to this agent. And here's what I'm going to hand to this agent. And then I'm going to hand an element to this agent. And then as they come back with the results, I'm going to now knit them together. And in fact, I may hand that to yet another agent to do some of the knitting together. And in fact, I may then hand it to another agent and say, hey, would you look at this and see if it sounds like we made this up or is this real? And give me back a point score that tells me you went to the sources and they actually exist. So that's how these things are being brought together.
Huh.
And then the other part of orchestration um, comes down to what are you going to access? So, in order to solve this query, I need you to go look at a database. I need you to go look at a store of information we have. We call that RAG. RAG is the term to bring data in to then make it accessible to the LLM as it tries to grind through and do whatever we're trying to do. And so it's that orchestration layer. Um, uh, you know, it's called a model content protocol. So that's actually the protocol we use. We all talk about APIs. So,
Right.
application program interfaces. MCPs are now that kind of the API of agents. So that's what controls what you can go out to and see. And the thing we were talking about had to do with security and privilege.
Mm-hmm.
So when an agent goes off to do something, who is it? So whose privilege did it inherit in a security sense? So is it I've launched it, so is it my privilege to go be able to look at data at a certain level, or is it at a lower level of privilege than what I have because it shouldn't be allowed to access that much? And then let's say an agent spawns an agent. So now we're talking about an agent saying, well, okay, I need to send these two agents off to do something. Well, what level of privilege and security are they going to operate with? What data can they look at? Simple. Can they look at PHI? Can they look at PII? So again, much of what we do in security is partition off things, right?
Right.
Build lots of partitions and you say, you can look at this one, but not that one, or you
Mm-hmm.
can look at a subset of this one. And so we have to make sure that as we have these autonomous helpers now off wandering
Who may
around our
be having babies.
we're creating more autonomous helpers out there.
Right.
What what rights do they have to do things? And so that's where a lot of the work of this last 6 months, frankly, has been being done among the hyperscalers, which is where most all of this runs, of being able to do all that. And then the other really critical aspect is you got to be able to audit it. You got to know what they went off and did. So you have to
Right.
be able to track it and audit it. And if something goes wrong, you need to be able to backtrack what happened. So you can't just have them sort of wandering around um, like like 11-year-olds off on their own, you know, getting
with
into
with the
whatever
keys to the
kind of
car.
yeah, or yeah, or your 16-year-old with the keys to the car. Um, so you've got to be able to understand how they're operating, how they're working. And so that's what this whole new notion of orchestration. Now, where it gets really complicated is let's say you bring in vendor products and
Mhm.
they show up with their orchestration layer. And then I'm over here with my orchestration layer. And now I'm having to think about how do these things relate to each other? Or how do I take their MCP server or whatever it is and make sure that it's understanding my security, my
Mm,
structure. So very, very complex as we start taking more sophisticated vendor product into a large overall world and
right.
have to now have all of the same cybersecurity and broad security controls reincorporated into those tools.
That's a huge job, or it sounds like a huge job. I
It
mean,
is a very
practically
big job.
speaking, how do you manage that? Do you map it out and make all the assignments? Or, of course, I'm way oversimplifying, but
That's the engineering that's going on right now all over. I don't know that there's a single answer. Each of the hyperscalers, when we say a hyperscaler, that's, AWS or Google or
Mhm,
Oracle or, pick your poison, Microsoft and Azure. They're building tools and platforms whose job it is to do that. And as long as you're sort of oriented in a single place, that works pretty well. A lot of this was invented actually by Anthropic. They're the ones who actually
right.
built the MCP protocols, but they've
Hmm,
been adopted now with the other hyperscalers. So where it becomes really complicated is when you have one vendor using AWS and another vendor using Azure. And how do we bring those kinds of things together? I don't know that anyone has truly engineered across hyperscalers at this point. But when you're thinking about vended product, it's an important thing to think about. Are they narrow enough that you don't care? So you're running them against a very well understood set of data in one spot, and they're not going to wander anywhere else. So okay. But if they're becoming larger and more complex in the solve, you have to really start thinking about how are they doing it and poking at some of their engineering under the covers. Hard conversations when you start
sure.
going broad.
And, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if they begin partnering with each other, or if they, consider themselves to be too competitive to do that, or, when large organizations like yours are I mean, they're gonna come up against this, right? They're gonna have to
Yeah.
figure out how to play or somebody's gonna have to figure out how they can play together. Uh,
Yeah.
so it'll be
There's
interesting.
every vendor that I talk to is incorporating some aspect of AI into their product. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I think they see it as a survival question, but they're also seeing it as a really unique opportunity to maybe expand the horizons of the work that they do and maybe do a little more what some other vendors had been doing and come
Mhm.
out of the box a little bit. So, when you talk about governance, it's relatively easy for us to govern things we build. It's really hard right now to govern what might be going on that you might not even know about.
Right.
Right. Who did what? And we've been using their product for years, and now it came out with some new features. And how did they build those? And do I now have to think about them differently? Now, are they something that I now need to understand what AI they used and how they did it? Or, how did they create these things? And so when you're out in a big organization, you have lots of users with lots of relationships with vendors that are probably not necessarily at the enterprise IT level. So it's interesting where these things are sprouting as we go as we go along out there.
And I think you made such an interesting point about, what you already have in-house and sort of these Trojan horses that may be, inside. Well, we've been using this vendor forever, and they added these things, and now we didn't even know about that, and
Right.
now they're a security risk. Yeah, I think that that's, probably something a lot of folks haven't thought about yet, and is gonna become more of an issue.
Yeah. How do you have that conversation how do you know to have that conversation with your long standing vendors?
Mhm.
and they may be very niche. They may be doing a very small thing for you, so you tend not to worry about them, right? They're just doing this, but now they're doing this plus,
Right.
and how did they
Now
get
they're
to
creeping
that?
into other space,
Yeah,
and
very.
I think it must be like a giant audit of, I mean, how do you get your arms around how much is out there and where it is?
I don't know. I mean, we're trying, and, you ask a lot of questions, and you chat with all your people, and you try to make sure folks understand that it's important for us to understand. And it's not necessarily the notion that, the central world is trying to control everything you do. It's really, we do need to have a picture of the technology that's being employed. And, are are things creeping into that wouldn't
Uh-huh.
one wouldn't expect, or at least you should be aware of.
Right, right. Um, so, clearly security is a huge issue. What are some of the biggest issues that you guys talk about and think about?
A lot of it has to do with privacy. So what data do you need to do this? Is it appropriate? Again, we're highly regulated. We're a HIPAA
Uh-huh.
organization, PHI, PII. We have the highest standards for protecting people's clinical information. So a lot of it comes down to what data do you need in order to do this? Another concern is, are you using our data to train your model? So
Mm. Are you using
you
my personal data to train your
or
model? Is that the
even
question?
are you using our proprietary information that now, just as a side effect of us using your model, you're using it to train your model, and that's going to then provide the training to other people outside. So how do
Mhm.
we think about containment, that, even though I'm calling your LLM, you won't use it for training in that LLM.
Right.
I don't want you to take what we think is some of our secret sauce and use it for other customers. Or if we,
Yeah.
if that happens, we want to be really aware of it.
You wanna do it intentionally.
Well, yeah, intentionality is very important. So a lot of the conversation comes down to privacy, intentionality, what kind of eh, are you building in a way that we really think is appropriate and checks all the boxes that we have. And then the other thing that's complicated in all of this world is cost. So everyone's doing pilots,
Right.
but when you scale the pilot up, are you going to run that LLM so hard that you pay for tokens is the term in the industry. Am I going to consume so many tokens that the ROI I was looking for gets consumed in the run cost?
It's wiped out. Mhm.
So you imagine, we've got 12.8 million people on our digital platforms. If they're asking a question over and over, are we just pounding away at something? So one of the things that's evolving in the world very much is, are all things going to be built on large language models, or are really what we're going to do is start to use small language models
Huh.
or even micro language models, which are really scaled down to a single purpose, so that they can run, benefits is a great example. I don't really need the, 3 billion term large language model to actually resolve most of the questions around a benefit. So am I better served by building a purpose-built small language model that can run much more efficiently?
Hmm.
And then I can use the large language model for the language in and out. And then we'll send an agent over to the small language model for the very specific thing, so that I'm not spinning the level of tokens. And then there's another concept that everyone's starting to do more, which is called pre-processing, which, if I know I'm going to have the same fundamental question over and over, I'll run it once and then structure it just as data, as the answer is data.
Hmm.
So I'm not running a model anymore. to
over and
answer
over.
that element of the question. So I'm starting to take things apart in a different way and think about what belongs in a large language model, what belongs in a small language model, what might be I want to run as a preprocessor, and then assembling all of that together at my orchestration layer.
And then they all have to talk to each other, and you have to mess with all of that. Yeah, that's super interesting because I think we all start with this, this concept of a large language model. And as you said at the beginning of our conversation, there's much more to it. And if we were to your point just now, if we were to use LLMs for everything, we'd spend all kinds of money. So we need more fit for purpose and probably domain type stuff that that really is not doing you're not shooting a flea with a cannon kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting. There was an interesting Wall Street Journal article in the last couple of weeks, basically saying that pilot's a dirty word now, because
mhm.
everyone did so many pilots, but they're not getting them to production. Now,
Right.
I think one can overreact to things like that. I mean, we are still going to, if we might rename them and not call them pilots anymore, but um, you'd have to work at a level to make sure you understand all of the components and the problem and the solution space, and then you want to ramp into a production world. But it was very interesting that how many pilots are not making it all the way through, and I think there's
Hmm.
two reasons. I think the biggest reason is a lot of people look at AI and they go, "This is going to solve everything." I just have to bolt this on and I'm done. And we get started, and what you learn is it doesn't work. And then they go into what I call the valley of despair. It's
Yes.
not gonna, it's not, we're not getting anywhere. And what you find out is you can't just take existing process and sprinkle AI on it. You have to rethink the process in the new terms of the technology. So you have to take it apart, and there'll be elements that you can in fact change. There'll be elements that you can't, and then you have to rethink it. So I think a lot of pilots just try to take existing approaches and processes and magically make them 80% more efficient or something. And so you fail because that's not going to work. And you have to do the hard work of the process reengineering in order to actually get AI to be the 80% solution that you're looking for. And so I think that's a mindset shift that
Mhm.
has to occur. It's nothing new in technology. I mean, it's nothing new. This has always been the case. You can't just, take the steam locomotive and make it go faster. It
Yes.
doesn't work.
Well, and I think this is a topic that's getting a lot of attention right now. It is really we have to deconstruct and reimagine,
Right.
the processes because you can't, as you said, you can't just bolt it on and have it produce magic. You have to sort of pull it apart and look at all the pieces and say, here's where it can help. And the processes change because that some of them are automated. They're completely different, and that's hard work. No, everybody wants the magic pill.
Yeah. Yeah. Your board is saying, how are you going to go faster
Right,
and get to
right.
all these objectives? And, why don't you do it tomorrow? And we're saying, well, there's a
Because
couple,
it's
couple
complicated.
complicated, first we may have to take these processes apart and rethink them. We have to make sure we understand the engineering. We have an evolving technology that's moving very, very rapidly. We don't want to cross the blue lines and take risks. And it's sort of a redefinition of risk because
Mhm.
I don't know that we know all of the ways that we might be taking risk with new technology at times. The notion that something, I mean, LLMs by their very nature want to please you.
Hmm.
They do. They
Yes,
try
they
to give
do.
you an answer that and that's when they hallucinate and make stuff up.
Hmm.
And, I don't know that I've ever played with the technology before that would make stuff up. So that's that's a brand new thing that
Yeah,
we're trying to understand of how do you protect against that? How do you detect that? How do you make sure that doesn't creep in? But it's a really different animal than we've played with before.
right.
And then you get into things like the clinical world and like playing with, people's healthcare. You simply can't take those kinds of chances. So, again, how much risk is involved in that? How much can you prevent? How do you detect it in real time? How do you keep the human in the loop is to use our really interesting ability to look at things and go, That doesn't look right."
Right, and, I mean, it's the world is more nuanced, than, AI at this point. Maybe it'll change, but there is
I
still
love that the world is more nuanced. And I think that should be our banner that we put up. I wanna do this. The world's a bit more nuanced.
Yes, it's a good line for your board, right? Go
Well,
faster.
y sure. That's what we use outside consultants for, to tell the board that it's a bit more nuanced.
There you go, there you go. Let somebody else deliver
Exactly.
the difficult
Mm.
news. Rob, I could definitely spend a lot of time talking with you about all of this. I'd love to wrap up with some, practical takeaways for people. Well, 2 things before we get into practical takeaways. I'd love to hear, maybe you can talk about a really successful use of AI that you're seeing at Kaiser right now.
Yeah, the probably what I would say is the most successful program that we've run is an ambient listening program. And by that, what we do is we've added ambient AI onto the cell phones that clinicians use. And they can take the cell phone and with the patient's permission, they can have the cell phone listen to the conversation. And then at the end of the conversation, the AI, the ambient listening technology, then proposes a clinical note, a SOAP note
Huh.
that it builds out of the conversation. And first off, we've had enormous adoption in our clinical space of starting off with very small group. And now I believe almost 20,000 clinicians are using some element of this, which is, unheard of in the clinical world for adoption at that speed.
Yeah.
It answers a real question of, what we call it cutting down on pajama time. So you don't have to go, after hours and type up all your notes. But I think there's a really interesting and incredibly compelling side effect in that when we introduce electronic medical records, EMRs, it kind of made the clinician focus on the EMR. So they're talking to you, but they're looking at their
They're
laptop, their
typing.
computer screen, they're typing
Mhm.
away. And and I think what has happened is the ambient listening is now allowed them to make eye contact,
Hmm.
to have a conversation in a much more natural way because they know that all of the data is getting captured and captured very, very accurately. Now you have to do a few things. When someone says my knee hurts, you have to go, your left knee? Because the ambient listening doesn't actually know what you're talking about. But other than those kinds of things, it's really very, very, very successful. So that's been a kind of I think, a real groundbreaking
Mm.
opportunity.
And
A
what a
lot of work going
paradox.
on also in clinical email of trying to help understand emails that are inbound, but there's lots and lots and lots of email that comes into doctors and really help structure and organize. That's another area. A lot of work in the contact center. We talked a little bit briefly about that. That's going to be groundbreaking, both in how you train people and then what you're really expecting. You're really expecting to teach them how to be empathetic representatives,
Huh.
not how to read benefit codes and claim denial reason codes and
Right.
all the arcane bits of healthcare. So you can actually change what you need to do to be good at something. And then the other thing AI does incredibly well, um, what what it what it does is, and this is all the machine learning world, is it's really good at grouping things together. It's really good at looking lots of data and saying, "Oh, these are the same, and this is the same over here, and this is the same over here. So it can look at lots of data and actually provide you very accurate outputs of it. So one area we're using it is reading regulations.
Hmm. Oh, how
So,
nice.
regulations are 5, 600 pages.
Right.
And so instead of spending 2 weeks of some poor analyst trying to pore through that and figure out what's important, you can use AI to actually read it and start to organize it and cluster it in ways and say, well, this is actionable. This
Uh,
this really applies to you. And so there's a fair amount of that going on. And then, of course, the personal productivity of having AI read your email for you or
yes.
draft for you or do things, help your Excel workbook. Those are very important in terms of letting people work at the top of their license in their day-to-day worlds. So that just some
Yes.
quick examples.
Lots of good stuff there. Rob, you work in this enormous organization, and many of the people who might be watching or listening probably work in smaller organizations that don't have the kind of resources that you have. But so if you were advising a leadership team that's just really starting to organize about, what are we going to do? What's our intent with AI? What do they need to think about?
There's a couple things. One, um, because so much of it is in the Chat GPT or Claude kind of world. One thing we've been doing is really making sure our most senior executives get some structured training
Oh, love that.
in how you do query engineering or how do you drive these things or the art of the possible so that they can have an expectation of how their people should be able to use something and then how their people can then be able to use something. So I think organizations have historically, you know, skilled up from the bottom up and often skipped everyone on the top. But in this case, it's a big enough change and there's a big enough productivity value that I would argue you really have to skill up at the top
Huh.
because how one manages now changes and what's possible changes. So that's one example for any organization right now in terms of thinking about how you do that. And then the second piece is you've got to really be talking to your vendors.
Huh.
There's a lot going on. They're doing a lot of investment or thinking about it right now. And so you really do need to understand where they're going and how they're getting there and what tools they're using to do it and where your data's going and how you need to be aware of you're the owner of your data. You do it on behalf of your customers or members or processes. And so you really have to think about what does this new world mean? What door did I just open and did I need to open that door? So very much, have those conversations. Think about what's going into making these new tools work and operate. And are you clear about the boundaries that you might have set out there? And then finally, I would say you have to be careful with over governing.
Hmm.
There's a tendency when new things come for us to, just grab everyone and say, don't do anything unless we already.
Don't touch.
And in this case, I think what would happen, what has happened in several organizations is they got so tight that it started popping up outside of their world and they lost all control of it.
Yes, all these
You know,
all the
all the
shadow
shadow,
AI,
everything.
blah, blah. Yes.
Yeah. So, I think you have to be a little more inclusive in how you think about governance and understand that there are things going on out there that you may not be able to directly control, but you will need to understand and start to incorporate as you think about what your strategy is overall.
Well, those are some great takeaways, and it's just a huge topic, and a lot to think about. And it's really been a great pleasure listening to you talk about it and getting inside the brain of Rob Alger for a little bit. So thank you so much for sharing.
No, it's always my pleasure, Sandra, and I've always enjoyed our conversations. This is a fast moving, interesting world. And unlike some of the technology, it involves all of us.
It sure
It's
does.
probably the most inclusive technical move that I've ever seen.
Mhm. Absolutely. I mean, my parents are interested in AI. I mean, it's just it really is inclusive and it touches us in so many ways. So it's very helpful to get a real perspective on it from somebody who understands it.
Well, I understand some of it. No, I want to meet someone who really
There's
understands it.
there's nobody that understands all of it.
I think that's the truth.
And it will always be that way, except for that agent that then spawns the other agents. Well, Rob, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed having you today.
My pleasure.